Hey guys, this is Jeff Stanek with Figured Out Baseball. Got a really good Figured Out Baseball podcast today. Someone that I honestly have wanted to get on the podcast for several years, so I'm really glad to have him on today. Someone that I've known for quite a while, haven't necessarily kept in touch with over the years, but met him a long time ago, and I've always been impressed with the things that he's done and how he's carried himself and what he's done in his career, both as a player and a coach. We're lucky enough to be joined in the podcast today by Coach Gandossy. He's the hitting coach and recruiting coordinator at Creighton University, a Division I school in the Big East in Omaha, Nebraska. So excited to have Connor on today. I'm going to go through his bio with you here before we start with him, before we jump into questions with him. And I did post on Twitter today that I was recording a podcast. I've gotten some DMs from some people who have some questions for him, so just excited to get into this one. Coach Gandossy is originally from Connecticut, but played his college baseball at St. Louis University. He was there from 2009 through 2012. While he was there in his last two seasons, he caught 49 games in each of those two seasons. His team won the Atlantic 10 regular season championships 3 times in his time at St. Louis, including advancing to the NCAA tournament in 2012, where they won a team record 41 games. In 2013, he started his coaching career as an assistant coach and the catcher's coach at Jefferson College, more often known as Jeffco, a really good Division I junior college program in Hillsborough, Missouri. Then from 2014 through 2017, he was an assistant coach at his alma mater at St. Louis University. He spent the 2014 season as a volunteer before being elevated to a full-time assistant coach in 2015, where he remained until after the spring of 2017. In his 4 years there, the team compiled a 129 and 95 record, including winning 34 or more games 3 out of the 4 seasons he was there. In the spring of 2018, he spent his first season at Creighton, where he has been since. He was hired there to coach the catchers, the hitters, and to be the recruiting coordinator. In 2018, the team finished 34 and 16. The offense took a significant jump that year in several offensive categories, but most importantly, they increased their runs per game by more than 2 runs compared to the previous season, a pretty significant jump there for the offense. In 2019, the team finished 41 and 13, including going 14 and 4 in conference. They won the Big East regular season and tournament championships that year. They advanced to the NCAA regional finals. In the regional finals, they lost to Michigan, a Michigan team who finished the season 50 and 22 and lost in the College World Series finals, the championship, to Vanderbilt. So if you're going to lose to anybody, that was one of the teams that was probably going to give you a tough time. That year in 2019, Creighton was ranked as a top 25 team in the country. They led the Big East in batting average for the first time ever, hitting .290 as a team. That year, Coach Gandossy also coached the Conference Player of the Year, who ended up being a 10th round pick out of Creighton. The 2022 team finished 31 and 18. They were 15 and 5 in Big East play that year, and that was another year that Coach Gandossy got to coach the Conference Player of the Year. That year, that player was selected 98th overall in the Major League Baseball draft. In his coaching career, he's coached 28 players who have moved on to be drafted by Major League Baseball teams, including 4 catchers who have gone on to be drafted by Major League Baseball teams. As a recruiting coordinator, he's had 4 classes that have been ranked in the top 100 recruiting classes in the country, including his 2020 class at Creighton, which was ranked in the top 50 overall. He earned his bachelor's degree from St. Louis University, earned his master's degree from Creighton in 2021. Coach Gandossy, great to have you on the podcast, man. I'm really glad to have you. Excited to talk to you today.
Jeff, I appreciate you having me on, man. I know it's been in the works probably for over a year now, so glad to be on with you.
So I typically start with something from the bio that stands out. And honestly, I did not know this until about a minute before we started recording or so. But I finally asked you where you were from. I just kind of assumed, because you spent all your time as a player and a coach in the Midwest, I kind of assumed you were from down that area, and I found out that you're actually from Connecticut. So I'm actually going to start this podcast. I'm sure we'll talk recruiting a good bit here, being that you are a recruiting coordinator at the Division I level, and that's, a lot of the questions that people that listen to this podcast have are on the recruiting side of things. But first, Connor, I actually want to ask you how a guy from Connecticut ended up going to St. Louis to play. Can you just talk us through how the recruiting process went for you, how those coaches saw you, found out about you, and just why you ended up choosing St. Louis for your playing career?
Yeah, for sure. It's long-winded story, so I'll try to make it shorter and easier for everybody to follow. But there was a really good club in Connecticut called the Connecticut Blue Jays. I grew up playing in that organization, and they obviously have done a tremendous job for decades of putting players into college baseball and the professional ranks for that matter. So I grew up playing with them. Headed into kind of your recruiting season, which was sophomore going into junior year, they joined up with a team from the northern part of Connecticut, and it was hard to get up there for workouts. So ultimately I decided to shift gears, and I hopped on with another team down in South Florida, actually. So it's called the South Florida Bandits. I don't believe they're still around. I see them pop in every now and then with perfect game tournaments, but they're not as prevalent as what they once were when I was coming through the high school ranks. And basically the South Florida Bandits were kind of the first showcase tournament team. And so you had kids from all over the country playing a variety of different tournaments. Probably the most well-known player that played for the South Florida Bandits. Well, there was a couple. DJ LeMahieu was one of them, Rick Porcello, Matt Harvey, guys like that. I hopped on with them. The guy that ran the organization had a really good relationship with Darren Hendrickson, who's the head coach at St. Louis University. They were kind of hopping over from Central Missouri, which is a powerhouse Division II. They offered me to come down on a visit. So I hopped on a flight from Connecticut down to St. Louis. Didn't really know a whole lot about St. Louis other than Yadier Molina and the Arch and Anheuser-Busch. I didn't know much about the city or the school for that matter, but I instantly fell in love with the city. It's just a baseball city. There's no other way to describe it. I fell in love with the coaching staff and what they wanted to build there. And I actually committed on my visit, which is kind of unheard of nowadays. But, it just felt right. It felt at home. And I'm really grateful to have that opportunity to have played there for 4 years.
It's an awesome story. And you've gotten a chance to play at St. Louis under a head coach who's been around for a very long time and has developed a tremendous program at St. Louis. I know even when I was at Duquesne, and this is hard to remember, I'm pretty old now, and this was a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure that St. Louis was not in our conference my freshman year and came in our sophomore year or something like that. But anyway, I didn't really know much about St. Louis baseball. It was a strange fit for me in the A-10, being from St. Louis in the Atlantic 10 conference, which at that time was mostly up and down, the East Coast and like northern East Coast teams. But I've known about St. Louis program for a long time. I actually almost coached with Coach Hendrickson at St. Louis way back in 2000. What would this have been? 2011. He offered me a job, and I actually accepted it for like a week, and then had to turn around, which is another story altogether. But I almost coached there myself. Just a tremendous amount of respect for their program, and now you coach for Ed Service at Creighton. Can you just talk a little bit about what some of those two, maybe any of the guys that you have played under, coached with, who have had impacts on you, and just kind of what they've meant to your development as a person, as a coach? Because a lot of guys just they never have the opportunity to coach or play under even one guy, that has a track record of these two guys, and you've gotten a chance to work with two long-tenured, really, really good coaches. Can you just talk a little bit about what that's meant to you in your career?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. They're both completely different in how they go about their business. So I'll start with Coach Hendrickson. I think in terms of what he brings from a coaching standpoint, he gave me the freedom as a young coach, 24 years old. He entrusted me with the catchers right off the bat. And then obviously having an opportunity to work alongside Will Bradley, who's now the hitting coordinator for Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay Rays, that is. Having an opportunity to kind of get my hand in with the hitter side of it as well. I think what Darren brings is he lets you do your job, and I think that's really awesome. And I think that's what every young coach, they need that guidance, but at the same time having that maneuverability and adjustability to go out and go do your job, I think is really important. And he gives you a lot of slack, and he obviously watches from afar, but he lets you go in there and get your hands dirty, and I think that's what you have to do as a young coach. In terms of coach service, I don't know if there's anybody better in the country at preparing his teams in a players, obviously continue to work with the catchers, and then he gives me, pretty much autonomy when it comes to the recruiting side of it. There's definitely a lot of freedom on that end, but I think in terms of the preparation and the detail, it's made me a better coach. And I think what Coach Service does is you need to be on top of your game every single day, or else you're going to have a conversation about it. Because his theory is we're not going to cheat these players. So I think with that, I've gotten two sides of it. Definitely two sides of the ball, which is awesome. Kind of two different paths or almost points in my career. And I've had two different people to kind of mold me, which is really good. So, as a player, Darren's really, really intense, which is fine. I think that's how coaching should be. He'll pat you on the back when you do a good job, but when you screw up, you're going to hear about it. So, I think that definitely molded me too as a coach. I think you need to kind of have that even keel personality where, you can't be too high, you can't be too low. So, both have done a tremendous job with me, and obviously I still talk to Coach Hendrickson weekly, and still pick his brain on advice when it comes to coaching.
So, what you just said about a coach being pretty intense and having the ability to be able to yell at a player when he needs to hear something. I know that's something that's maybe not, maybe it gets more frowned upon slightly every year, just because either kids can't handle it or it's just not the norm anymore. But I think that to be able to do that as a coach, I agree with you that I think that it needs to happen probably more for young players. But I also think that you need to have a certain kind of relationship with players. I think as a head coach, you need to, in a way, earn the ability to be able to yell at players and not lose them, if that's fair to say. So you were in that system where you probably got gaffed a couple times, especially as a young player, for things that you did, maybe something dumb that you did or didn't do or whatever it was. What about Coach Hendrickson at St. Louis gave him the ability to be able to be the intense guy that he is and be able to kind of chew a player out when he needed to, but not lose that player? Because I think that that's something that there's a lot of guys that just yell to yell, and I know this is a high school level, little league, college, it doesn't matter. Guys that yell to yell and their players can't take it. They don't like the person. They don't have any respect for the coach. But there's other programs where guys can do that and the players almost respect the guy more for it. Or like what I've seen, I guess, is there are certain times when as a player it's tough, but when you leave there, you look back as a player and you're like, hey, coach, I appreciate what you did for me there and being so hard on me. It made me the person I am today. But what do you think about what about Coach Hendrickson makes him the kind of guy that can be tough on players but not lose them and actually make them better because of it?
Yeah, I think it's a whole staff thing too. I mean, not just Coach Hendrickson, but if the staff has shown that they are in it for you and not themselves, I think you have to give respect in order to get respect. That's just my theory. Maybe some people are different. That's fine. I think this generation, they're not. I know everybody wants to pick them apart and say, oh, they're soft, they're different, blah, blah, blah. I think what this generation wants is they want a path, they want a reason why, and they want respect, and they want to be shown why things are happening the way that they're happening. And so I think me as a player, the way I was brought up, it was always just, hey, give respect, give respect. I think this generation now, if you give respect, they're going to give it back, and then you've built that up where if you need to get into somebody, you can do that, and you've earned that right. I think the biggest thing when it comes to coaching is picking and choosing your spots. I've played for coaches where they do just yell to yell, and you kind of just tune them out. And you're like, this guy's act is tired, and I'm just not going to respond to that. I think if you have a coach that picks and chooses his spots where, maybe he gets a little riled up, I think that gets everybody's attention. I think it's more effective. And it gets everybody a little bit on edge, and that's fine. So I think for me, like what I've learned from the two guys that I've worked for, obviously I've worked for other people, but the two guys that we're referring to is you got to pick and choose your spots. I think if you're just yelling all the time, that doesn't play well. It's just not going to work. And I think if there's coaches out there listening, you also need to understand what each player can and cannot handle. This goes for people in the big leagues, and I've heard it from coaches in the big leagues. There are players that they can use kid gloves, and they have to use kid gloves for because they just won't respond to it. And then there's players that can handle it. And these are grown men. So I think everybody's different. I think the same thing could be said if you worked in a business. You need to understand who you're working alongside and what their personality is, and if they're going to respond well to it or if they're going to respond poorly to it. But I think that's the fun thing about coaching, is really getting in there and finding out who you have and who you're surrounded with, and then curtailing your coaching style to what your team is all about.
So if I told your players at Creighton, what are they going to say that Coach Gandossy is like day to day at practice, in game? You know, are you a little bit different in practice than in a game? Are you different in the fall than you are in the spring? You know, what are you? You more the guy that's got your arm around a guy, kind of pumping him with some confidence? Do you take the role on staff of, you know, being the one that's kind of harder on players and got the big expectations for them, and you're going to let them know when they're not living up to it? Like, what's your role there at Creighton?
I think I'm more of the hybrid style, and that's pretty much just my coaching method across hitting, catching, and recruiting and coaching. I straddle the line pretty much on everything. And what I mean by that is I'm going to put my arm around them when I sense that they're down. And then I'm going to push their buttons when I sense that they need a little kick in the backside. You know, I have standards and expectations, you know, we all do as a staff to what is expected, in terms of a product on a field. And if they're not being upheld, then they're going to hear about it. But at the same time, I understand how hard it is to play baseball. It's a game built around failure. And if your responses are not, you know, well, from the events that are happening, it's hard for these kids to kind of pull themselves out of that hole. So again, there's times and places to get after them. I think if you were to pull the team, you know, I guess the old adage is a player's coach. But, you know, I can get a little gnarly if we're not meeting the hitting expectations that we've kind of put forward. But it comes from a place of love. I didn't hop into coaching for myself, because, you know, we all know that we don't make enough money anyway. So, you know, it's definitely not, I'm not here for me. I'm here for the players. And that's one of the reasons why I got into coaching, is to get players to where I didn't go.
So when things are going tough for players, I want to talk a little bit about just how you help guys that are struggling, that are scuffling. And I want to ask this with this perspective. So for anyone that's listening to this later on, we are recording this in opening week, the off day for Creighton, but it's opening week for Division I. So in a couple of days, Connor's going to be on the field with his guys. You know, but other levels have already started. And I know that, for example, the Lander University, where I coached last year, they played a couple weeks, and there are some guys there that are playing pretty well and some guys there that are really scuffling. And I can put myself in the shoes of the guy who's hitting 170 after 2 weekends, in a midweek, and is like, and there, you know, maybe you started the first 6 games of the year and sat the 7th game, and you're sitting there thinking like, oh my God, I'm never going to find my way in the lineup again. You know, how do you help guys on your team that you know what they're capable of, and they're capable of being a really good player, if not an all-conference type player? They're scuffling right now. As the hitting coach, what are some things that you're doing, some conversations you're having, maybe some things you're doing in the cage or saying in the cage? I know it's a little bit different for everybody depending on what the struggle is, but generally speaking, when a guy comes into the season with a lot of expectations, you know, everybody's super positive going into week 1. And then a couple weeks go by and the guy feels like he can't buy a hit. He's swinging through balls he should be hitting. What are some things that you do to try to help guys out of that? And Connor, I just want to say this too. I record these podcasts with always thinking of the people who are listening to this and how we can help them. And I think there's a lot of coaches that listen to this. There's a lot of parents of players that listen to this. And there's a lot of players themselves, you know, high school and college players who listen to this. A lot of young coaches who are trying to get better. So, you know, just from your experience, what are some things that you do with a hitter who's scuffling, things that work to kind of get a guy back on track?
I think just simplifying as much as possible. I think The only problem I have with the game where we're at today is that we're really good at overcomplicating things. And I think if you can simplify it, especially when you got a kid scuffling, I think if you just go back and break it down from simplistic, system and just say, okay, we're going to get to a good spot, we're going to get on time, and we're going to see the baseball, and we're going to trust our ability to get off a good swing, good things are going to happen. But the problem is we have so much noise upstairs. Sometimes it's hard to keep it simple. So, sitting down and trying to analyze and almost diagnose the issue, I think is the first thing. So, getting them in a room saying, all right, what are you feeling at the plate? Well, I'm thinking about this mechanically, or I'm thinking about this. And the minute you start thinking about mechanics when you're up there hitting, it's going to be really hard to hit. And we want our guys to be as athletic as possible. So in my opinion, I think hitting always stems back to timing. And for example, we started off team practice, I think it was January 26th. We were inside. It was still cold here. Even though it's been an unbelievable mild winter. We were inside for the first couple days of practice, so we started live hitters. Guys got blown away. You got arms, 90 plus, and they're blowing bats away. And, you break down with the hitters after, and it's like, fellas, you're indoors, and it's the first time you've seen live pitching since October. So take it with a grain of salt, stick to your process, keep working. So obviously we keep building up, and you get outside, you start taking BP. Everybody remembers the minute that you get out of the gym and start taking BP, everything's pull side, because your timing's off. And so I think just explaining to them, like, hey, there's a process to this, there's a process to this. Where are we going to be on game week? And, we sat down as an offensive unit last week, and we just said, hey, listen, we want to feel really, really good going into that off day on Monday on game week. Your timing's going to be as close as it's going to be to the game. You're going to have 4, 5, 6 scrimmages under your belt. You've probably had 15 to 20 at-bats under your belt. Just have the ability to stay positive. Don't be caught up in the results. Don't care about how many hits you get in the scrimmage. Just stick to your process. Are you seeing the ball well? Are you getting to a good spot? Are you repeating your timing? Is your BP translating? And I think if you just break it down as simple as that and give them goals, small goals, to keep building up to where they're at, I think is important. Now, if we go out the first 2 weeks and we got guys scuffling, obviously we have the ability to take a look at a lot of video. But in my opinion, I think a lot of it has to do with timing, which therefore impacts your approach. And if you're late, you're going to hit a ton of fly balls because you're going to be stuck on your backside. If you're super early, you're going to hit a ton of ground balls to the pull side because you're probably on your front foot. And when you're on time, you have the ability to have the center of your mass underneath you, and you have the ability to hit a lot of line drives. So I think for our guys, just getting them to a good spot, repeating it, and getting your swing off, I think will put them in a good place.
Connor, what do you think is something that gets overcomplicated maybe the most? And I'm asking this almost from like the focus of high school baseball, the focus of guys when they're hitting indoors and they're trying to post videos on social media about, the things they're doing in the cages. I've thought for a long time that the focus of hitters and instructors is sometimes it's off from what is going to be the focus when they get to college. But what do you feel like in today's game with the guys that you're recruiting, from what they're doing in high school to what they're doing when they show up on campus? What do you think are some of the things that are being overcomplicated the most, or maybe some things you're having like coach out of guys or reshift their focus, like, hey, you're focused way too much on this when really your focus should be as simple as this? Is there anything you can point to that you think it's overcomplicated the most at levels before they come to you at Creighton?
How much time do we have, Jeff? I mean, there's a lot when it comes from a hitting standpoint. I think as simple as being consistent hitting the balls the other way is such a lost art that it takes a long, long time, a lot of offset machine work, a lot of offset BP, front toss, whatever it may be. I mean, it's just you don't have a lot of kids that can hit the ball the other way. So I always tell our kids this, even when they get to college. All right. So the first meeting we have with our guys in the cages downstairs, I say, okay, this is where you're going to get the most amount of swings in these 3 or 4 cages we have down here. Are you training your swing to look sexy on Twitter or on Instagram and look really good in a 60-foot cage? Or are you training your swing to hit the Friday night guy from X school? Are you training your swing to hit the closer from X school? And that's a question that kind of raises a lot of eyebrows. And so if you're in high school and you're inside with an instructor, it's great that you're working on your game. That's awesome. Are you training the swing so it matches up on the field? And that's what I would challenge all hitting instructors is, like, get out of the cage, put them on a field, put them in game-like situations, show them what it's like to execute an approach. And I think the biggest thing, and here's where I differ with a lot of people, I think a lot of people are always like, oh, hitting comes down to being competitive, or because, you could have a bad swing, but if you're competitive, it'll take over in the game. I disagree. Then you got the people that are like, hey, you need to have an unbelievable fundamental swing in order to execute at a high level. Everything else doesn't matter. I disagree. I think you need to have a strong foundation with your mechanics in order to execute your approach at a high level, in order to be super confident, in order to compete at a high level. So in my opinion, it's like a 33%, kind of combination that you have. The mechanics are going to affect the approach, which will affect your confidence in order to execute the job. And I think that's where you can go back and simplify and be like, okay, which one of these three is kind of haywire here? Are we afraid to compete? Is our approach wrong? Are we not understanding what the guy is trying to do on the mound? What's the problem on the mound? And then dictate your approach off that. Or is there something mechanical with the swing? I think we just hone in on one thing way too much. And my guess is, you got to look at it from kind of that method where there's three different things that you got to look at.
We probably need to have another podcast at some point and just talk hitting for an hour, because I think that nothing gets screwed up on social media more than hitting. There's so much so much noise on social media that is just not what young hitters need to be hearing. There are so many guys that are inventing all this stuff that looks funny, but they're going to sell it to you, and they're going to sell it to you in a way that, like, this is the only way to do it. If you don't come hit with me and you don't hit like I teach, you will never be as good as you could be. And there's so much of that out there that I really think we could spend a full 60 minutes talking about it. But I do want to ask you, Connor, about what you said just about, like, guys just don't have the ability to hit the other way anymore because it's just not something that a lot of people do. And to be honest with you, when I got to Lander last year, I don't want to talk too much about my own coaching career. It's not nearly what yours has been. But there we took backside rounds, and it was like guys are looking at me like, and we did like things like hit and runs where we tried to hit the ball through the opposite side. Like if it's a right-handed hitter through the 3-4 hole, if it's a left-handed hitter, try to hit a ground ball through the 5-6 hole. Guys couldn't understand why I thought that was important. And, but I'm at 38 years old last year. I was at a maybe different position than I was when I was 25 to be able to have more conversations with guys and tell them why that's important other than just executing. There's a lot of fundamental parts of hitting behind that. But I want to ask you just about your comment about guys can't hit the other way anymore. Why is that important? For someone listening to this who's saying, like, well, who cares if I can hit the other way if I have some big time exit velocity to my pull side, coach, and I can pull a ball that's on the outer white and I can pull a ball that's on the inner white. Why do I need to hit the ball the other way? What would be your response to that?
I think it actually makes you a better pull side hitter. If you have the ability to hit the ball the other way, stay flat and level through the off field, it's going to make you a better pull side hitter. I think if you got a guy that's just spinning off everything because he's got an insane exit velo to the pull side, come game time, I mean, a lot of that's going to be topspin. I'm not saying topspin doesn't play if you're chasing hits. I don't advise kids to chase hits. I don't think that's an attainable goal when the game starts. But I think if you look at the trend of college baseball, if you can't hit the ball the other way, you're going to be a well below average hitter. The counts have completely swung, from like 2-1 used to be back when you and I played, it was like you're getting a fastball. And now it's like 50-50, you're going to get something off speed. 1-1 has shifted to like 55-60% off speed. Because that's what you see in the big league game. And so it's slowly trickled into the college game, and now you have pitchers that can actually execute a 2-1 breaking ball or a 2-1 changeup. So if you don't have the ability to hit the ball the other way, you're going to struggle. There's going to be a lot of swing and miss. And I actually think if you can't hit the ball the other way, your swing path is going to have a lot of holes on the inner half. You're probably going to be out and around the baseball. You're probably not going to stay tight to your body. And then we can't ask you to execute the game. So if we got to run around third, less than 2 outs, infield's back, and you can't hit, or if you got corners in, you can't hit a ball to the second baseman, or you can't hit and run. You can't run and hit. I mean, there's just a lot of things that come with it. Your strikeout rate's going to be up a ton. Your swing and miss rate's going to be up a ton. I mean, there's just a lot of things that go with it that I think are really baffling in my opinion. And I think really good hitters, college, pro, high school, they have the ability to drive the ball to all fields. Makes the pitching coach's job a lot harder, the catcher's job a lot harder to call the game if you have the ability to cover both sides of the plate. So I think, like, when it comes to that, like, you need to start thinking about that if you're in high school, even if you're in junior college. I don't want to say, it's just really hard because, like you and I talked about, I have a 2-year-old, and so he's picking up the bat, and, if I flip him a ball, where do you think he's going to hit it? He's going to hit it to the pull side. It's just kind of how you were raised. Everybody does it. It's human nature. Everything's going to the pull side. You kind of got to teach it out of them, but you got to have a mature player that understands that, and hopefully you have a coach that you're working with understanding that. And going back to your point, not to go long-winded here about my soapbox about hitting, what I always tell our guys, and when I tell campers this, when I'm talking about hitting when we have camps, I love it that kids are on social. Like, the thing that I'm a little bit jealous of is they have so much information on social media. A lot of it's good. A lot of it's really bad. A lot of it works for some kids. A lot of it doesn't work for others. You need to figure out what's going to work for you. And you need to understand, I hope every kid watches professional baseball. I think that's part of the reason why maybe the older generation has an issue with this generation, because they don't have a baseball IQ. They don't watch a ton of baseball on TV. My issue is, though, like, don't model your game just because a big leaguer's doing it. Like, those are the 1%. They're really good. They've had tens upon tens of thousands of reps behind what they're doing. They can do things that you can't do. I heard from an alum, like, he played with a prolific player in the big leagues. Like, we're talking top 5 in the game. He'd take a nap until 6:50 every night, and he'd take 2 rounds in the cage, and then he'd go out and get 3 hits. Like, there's just not a lot of people that can do that. So I think, like, you need to understand, like, you need to model your game behind what's going to help you. I'm not saying you can't learn from them, but make sure everything that you're doing, is going to help you and not make it look really cool because you saw it on Twitter.
To ask you another thing, and I want you to stay in the soapbox about hitting. That's why we're doing this. I primarily do this because I want people to be informed, and I want people to hear from actual successful coaches who do it on the field, on grass and dirt, and not on concrete and netting. I want people to hear from a coach who's got the experience that you do, heck, as a player and as a coach. But I'm going to ask you about something else that is almost hard for me to imagine is controversial, but it is. You used the term flat and level in describing essentially a good fundamental swing. I want to ask you about that. I want you to expand on as much or as little as you want to, but flat and level is not cool. It's not trendy. It's not sexy on Instagram and Twitter. So why is that a term that came out of your mouth when talking about a hitter who's going to be able to have success against high level pitching? Why is flat and level on your out of your mouth?
Flat and level is going to be able to match any plane of the pitches that you're going to get. So, like, on a lower 12-6 breaking ball, you're going to be a little bit more uphill than you would be on a fastball that's got ride through the zone. When you got a fastball that's ride through the zone, you got to go straight across your chest with it. If you're uphill on a fastball that's riding through the zone, you're going to swing and miss on it. If something's working away from your barrel, you're going to have to stay a little bit more level to the baseball. But a flat and level, repeatable swing is going to give you the opportunities to match the plane for the pitches that you're going to get. And I think having the athleticism and the adjustability with your body and with your bat plane is going to make you as successful as possible. I think if you're a one-plane hitter, you're just going to struggle. And I don't, like, this is where I differ between big leagues and college. Like, you're just not going to have a ton of guys that are going to hit 25 home runs in college and punch out, 110 times. Like that would be the equivalent of somebody hitting 40 or 50 home runs in the big leagues and punching out 200 times or 180 times, whatever it may be. Like you're just not going to have that. It's just not going to happen. We're amateur players, so like when I say like have a swing that's repeatable, have a swing that's consistent, have a swing where you're going to be able to, hit the ball hard as much as possible. In my opinion, I think that's a swing that can adjust to the planes on the pitches that you're going to get. More oftentimes than not, that is a flat level swing. And I think sometimes when people think that, they think super downhill. I don't teach downhill swing. I don't teach uphill swings. I teach swings based on the pitches that you're going to get. So sometimes you're uphill, sometimes you're more flat across your chest. Again, like I think we need to look at this from a very simplistic method. Don't be so far on one side. Don't be like, oh my God, we got to hit everything in the air. Well, it's like, okay, if you play in a small ballpark, you could probably get away from that. But if your conference tournament or your high school tournament is at a huge ballpark, is that really going to help you? I think it helps you get there, but is that going to help you get the end goal? Why don't we just teach versatility? Just simplify that as much as possible. Teach versatility. Give your players every tool to put on the tool belt so they can walk in any ballpark, face any pitcher at any time of the year, cold, hot, night, day, doesn't matter. Give them an opportunity to have success. I think that's the biggest thing.
I just wish I could just blast out that last clip to every high school coach in the country, every travel coach in the country, every parent and kid in the country who's facing college baseball, and wants to play at the next level, because there's so much wisdom in simplicity and being able to be repeatable and not trying to do too much and letting extra base hits happen naturally. What I've always said to guys is just that lift. I'd like to see if you're welcome to disagree with me on this, but I'd like to see if you agree or disagree. But I've always told hitters that lift happens naturally because of several factors in physics that have to do with baseball. The baseball's coming at a downhill plane. Your shoulders are higher than the strike zone, so like at some point, no matter how flat you try to be, like at some point your swing starts to work uphill. You want to backspin balls, and you only backspin balls if you hit slightly on the bottom half of the baseball. Like lift and extra base hits just happen naturally. And the best hitters out there, the ones that are going to hit for a high average and a high slugging percentage, are the guys that are squaring up balls, off the good part of the barrel, and guys that are on time. Those guys are they're going to hit some hard one hoppers too, but they're also going to hit a lot of balls that carry in a gap, or that carry over the fence. And if you have true home run power, you're going to hit plenty of balls, to and over the wall. But that I believe that only happens with a simple approach of just trying to hit line drives in the middle of the field. And I've seen it work for so many guys that have a lot of different skill levels. But it's amazing to me how that's just like, that's not the norm anymore. That's it's like if you teach that, you're not up with what's current, and you haven't learned, you haven't progressed. You're still teaching what people taught 30 years ago, and you haven't done enough research. And well, maybe you think that, but I'm gonna keep thinking what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say like there's nothing wrong with what people did 30 years ago. I think hitting's definitely evolved. I think we're a lot smarter behind what we're doing. Obviously, there's a lot of science behind the hitting. Golf is still 10 years ahead of us. I mean, everything that we're doing now from a hitting standpoint, golf was doing 10 years ago. I think from a hitting standpoint, though, like, and another foundation of what we talk about is everything starts and ends with the lower half. And that's where bat speed comes from. I mean, like when I was growing up, everybody said, hey, use your hands, bat speed comes from your hands. Okay, well, like we've obviously got a little bit more biomechanical information behind the swing. There's more science behind the swing, like showing that more ground force that we put down to the ground is going to travel up through our body into our core with more rotational power. And that's where a lot of the bat speed comes from. So I think like when I goes back 10 minutes ago when I started talking about getting to a good spot and landing, like part of that is like making sure that you're in your lower half and you're having the ability to drive your energy down to the ground. My issue with Twitter is everything's belly button up. I mean, if you go on Twitter and you look at hitting, everything's talking about the upper half because the lower half is really hard to talk about. And like not everybody's got the same lower half. If you look at a big league hitter, like everybody's different. And I think of the obvious problems, and this is what I learned from Will Bradley, who's having a great career, from a hitting standpoint, is like we always look at the obvious problem. And perhaps the obvious problem is not the issue. We got to find the root of the problem that's causing the obvious problem. In my opinion, a lot of it stems from poor lower half posture, poor lower half positioning, getting stuck on your backside, being too heavy on your front side, not being, center of your mass, in the middle of your body. Like I think a lot of that has to do with it. So we hammer out lower half. Like we talk about hip hinge and making sure you're in your back hip and riding it out as long as possible in order to get to a good position. So I'm big in the lower half, man. I think that's a huge part of the swing.
I want to kind of stay on this just a slight bit longer on this general topic. I am going to backtrack a bit from something you said a little bit earlier. I kind of asked, what you do with guys that are scuffling a little bit. And I'd like to just ask if you have anything that you do, that you talk about, stuff that you show guys or whatever it may be to help them focus on the process over results. That is something that you said earlier. And, for me in a lot of my career as a player and then as a coach, quality at bats was something that I focused on with guys, more so than the batting average, because batting average is all about results, which you can hit a ball really hard and it's caught. You can hit a ball off the tape of the bat and find a way to get a hit. But is there anything that you do with your guys to help them to focus on different things other than results and help them feel good about, like if they're scuffling, for example, help them to find a way to find some positives in an 0 for 4, but there were a couple of productive at bats or a couple of, really grinded out at bats in there where they saw 11 pitches or something. Do you have anything you do with your guys that you kind of keep track of or something you show them or talk to them about on a regular basis to help them focus on something besides the results of the box score?
Yeah, great question. I can't tell you. So I think you brought up when you were doing the bio, you brought up what we hit in 2019. I don't know our team's batting average. I don't ever look at it. So I'm going to be a little bit of a wise guy here and just say, like, the batting average was invented because it gave the pitchers a chance. So, like, I don't ever talk about BA with our guys. It's strictly quality at bats, hard hit contact, and, swing and miss rate is pretty much the only three things that we're going to talk about in terms of, like, analytical stats, weighted on base, and then OPS. Those are really the only things that we're going to talk, and then runs scored, obviously. Those are really like the main facts that we like talk about with our guys. I don't ever talk about batting average. I love to talk to high school kids or even young kids where it's like, hey, what's your goal in the game? And they're like, well, I'm getting 4 hits. And I think Steve Springer said it a long, long time ago, and I wish I had it a little bit more as a player, where it's like, man, you can do everything right and still go 0 for 4. So, like, quit chasing hits. And so I think going back to a kid that's scuffling, like, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show him all the positive video that we got. So we're going to hop on Synergy. We're going to hop on our video system. We're going to say, hey, here's all the balls that you hit really hard. And this kind of ties back into what we do with our sports performance coach, Brian Kite, who's also a genius in his own right. And it's like basically like, hey, I can do this. I believe that I can do it. And now I'm going to go execute it. And I think if you can go to do those 3 things, like, and then I think the last thing with that is I'll be okay if I don't get the results that I want. And I think that's the biggest thing with kids is they're so afraid of what the reaction is going to be if the result doesn't go their way. Are they going to get benched? Are they going to get cut? Is mom and dad going to be disappointed in them? And I think if you can just say, listen, and this goes for any sport across the spectrum, it's going to be okay if the result isn't what you want it to be. Nothing's going to happen to you. Now, again, like, could you get cut? Yeah, that's a possibility. But you know what? Don't get in the ring if you don't want that. It's okay. You don't have to play college baseball. There's going to be factors where you're taking a risk by signing up. If you're afraid of the result, like there's going to be risks if it doesn't go your way. But just know, like you as a person, it doesn't change who you are. And I think telling our guys, like, you've done it before, you have the capability of doing it, and you're going to be okay if it doesn't go your way, I think eases that anxiety a little bit. But I think giving them positive reinforcement when they're struggling, I think is really important. But I don't believe in false confidence at the same time. Like if there is an issue, then we got to get in there and fix it. But I just think like giving them that reassurance, like you're going to be okay if you go over 4 today. Like I think that's where that comes into play, where they get so nervous and geeked up that, if they don't get a hit at this at bat or it's not a quality at bat, they're going to freak out. But that's kind of my long-winded answer on that one.
Yeah, it's something I wish I had too as a player a little bit more is be not tying your results in with who you are as a person and your value, as a human being isn't necessarily tied to the box score. Love those conversations, and I've had Steve Springer on here before, and I learned a lot from him just from talking with him. And I think anybody that, if you haven't heard Steve Springer talk and you're listening to this podcast, you really should find a way to listen to Steve talk. He's such a good influence, such a bright spot, I think, in the mental side of baseball. If you haven't heard of Steve, check him out. I know we don't have a ton of time left here, but I definitely want to ask you about the recruiting side of things. There's a whole lot to talk about there, and I actually want to go to something that you mentioned before we started recording, and just see if it's coincidence or not. I asked you how you thought the team was going to be, and you kind of told me how you thought the team was going to be in 2024, and you described part of the way you described the team as being big and physical. And I just want to ask you about that on the recruiting side of things. And it's not a question that I'm hoping you answer in a particular way. It's just a question that I'm genuinely curious about with how you recruit. Do you recruit big physical guys on purpose? Do you feel like when you go to see a guy, and if you see a guy who can really hit and run, but he's undersized, he's 5'9", 160 pounds or something like that. Like, do you stay away from him because you want a roster to look a certain way, or is that just kind of how this roster fell into place? Just curious about whether that's on purpose or not, that your roster this year is a bunch of big physical guys.
This year, I think it was more kind of geared towards that. I think last year we were probably a little bit undersized. We weren't as powerful as we needed to be. And what I mean by that is just hitting balls in the gaps. I'm not actually talking about home run power, but, and I thought we just kind of faltered down the stretch in terms of our physicality. When we got down the road the last 3 weeks of the year, I think we just kind of withered away a little bit. I mean, we were in first place going 3 weeks to go in the season. So I think last year's fall body weight, the team average was 185, and this year's 200. So like a significant difference overall with the 40-man roster that we have. I don't pigeonhole kids. I mean, like before I got here, many years before I got here, Spencer Allen was the recruiting coordinator, who's now the director of player development for the Brewers and used to be the head coach at Northwestern. He recruited a kid out of Chicago by the name of Nicky Lopez. Nick has gone on, played for the Royals, got traded to the Braves this season. Now he just got traded back to the White Sox. I mean, I met him my first week on the job here in fall 2017, and it was alumni weekend, and this kid walks in, he goes, "Hey, coach, can you throw me BP?" And I said, "Sure." So I'm throwing BP at this guy, and I'm like, what year are you? And he goes, "I'm in Double A." And I started laughing, and he goes, "What?" And I mean, Nick is 5'10", 5'11". I mean, I don't know how much he weighs now, but I didn't believe that he was in Double A. The dude's in the big leagues. He's crushing it. He's one of the best infielders in terms of defense in the big leagues. So I think there's a spot for everybody. I think there's just so many factors that go into it what do you bring to the table? Are you a good runner? Do you have a knack for squaring up the baseball? Are you an unbelievable defensive player? I think that kind of starts and ends in our program. Coach just puts such a high premium on defense. If you can't catch and throw, we're not going to recruit you. I don't care how good of a hitter you are. If you cannot catch and throw, you will not survive at Creighton. And that was obviously a big learning, step for me in recruiting in this program is, we're looking defense first. But at the same time, we want you to be able to handle the bat. But, I think there's just so many factors that go into it. And I just got done talking to somebody, last week. They were like, hey, I'm undersized and my exit velo's this and I run this and I don't think I'm going to be able to play Division I. And my question was, why not? I'm not, if you want to play Division I, there's a lot of things that go into it. You don't have to be a 6'5" runner and hit 95 on average. And you don't have to throw up, 94. There's a spot for everybody and there's a lot of things that go into it. One of our best left-handed relievers is 5'10", 165 pounds, but he's going to get most college left-handers out because he can spin the breaking ball. Our shortstop this year is 5'10". He's not a physical dude, but he can pick it with the best of them, and he has the ability to hit the ball to all fields. So our first baseman is 6'3", 215, 220 pounds. Our DH is 6'4", 235 pounds and has 8% body fat. So the whole roster is different. And I think that's the cool thing about baseball is we don't all have to be 6'8" and have a 40-inch vert. I think there's a lot of things that go into it when it comes to baseball. So this roster, we just wanted to get a little bit more physical, a little bit more athletic. But I think if you just look at college baseball as a whole, every roster is different.
All right, so I have two ways I'm going to go with that. One of them is one of the questions that I got on Twitter. I haven't done a very good job of getting to in this podcast. But I had somebody that just kind of said, they wanted me to ask your thoughts about the focus on exit velocity for hitters as opposed to the focus on developing the entire game, all of the tools. And the kind of question that it came down to was, would you rather recruit a guy who ran a 6'7", and I'm just going to ask it just like it was. I'm going to give it no context or any of my own input. Would you rather recruit a 6'7" runner with 91 exit velocity or a 7'2" runner with exit velocity 96 to 100? That's how the question was phrased. And I want to ask you some more stuff about recruiting, but I'm going to start with this one since it was, a question I got on Twitter to ask you, and we're kind of in that zone right now between those guys. 6'7" runner with a 91 exit velocity or a 7'2" runner with 96 to 100 exit velocity. Obviously we know nothing else about this hypothetical made-up player, but which guy is more intriguing to you?
That's tough because there's so many, like I said, there's so many things that go into it. What position do they play? I look at exit velocity. I do. It's really important to me. I look at exit velocity differential though as well. If they're averaging 96 to 100 at the high school level, that's really, really impressive. Is it 96 to 100 to all fields? If I had to pick just a blind sample size, I'm probably the ballpark that we play in. I'm probably going, if he's a high school kid right now and he's averaging 91, he runs a 6'7", I'm probably leaning towards him because it sounds like he's just an overall athlete. But I also think the 60-yard dash is a little bit overrated. I don't think we ever run that far in baseball in a straight line. I think you're looking more first to third type stuff. But I'll probably lean towards 6'7", if I had to. It sounds like he's got a couple tools that he can do. But there's just a lot of factors that go into it, and I think you as a coach kind of understand that as well.
Let's talk a little bit more about recruiting. I'm going to go to my own social media experience now, and I wish I could remember who posted it, but I don't recall. But I saw something in the past week about how someone is trying to, and someone I think, without remember who it was someone with I think has a pretty good knowledge of the game and what happens on the recruiting side of things. But someone posted that to be a Division I recruit right now, you need to have two must-have tools. Whatever those tools are, you've got to have two must-have tools if you're going to play at Division I. So I want to ask you a bit more about recruiting, and I know it's such a gray area, Connor, that it's really hard to just give a black and white answer to this. But for people that are listening to this that are just kind of wondering what a Division I player looks like right now, and let's stick with high school players. A high school player who is going to get recruited by Creighton, is it fair to say that that player needs 2+ must-have tools or more to be recruited by you guys? Or is there still the player that exists out there that is well above average in almost every tool across the board and is just a really good player, doesn't necessarily have a pro tool or a tool that would be, a plus tool on your team? Like, he doesn't need to be maybe the guy's not one of your top 3 or 4 fastest runners, doesn't have one of your top 3 or 4, velocities across the infield or from the outfield or whatever, isn't one of the best 3 to 4 power hitters on your team as far as pure exit velocity and average exit velocity. So is it fair to say that a guy needs a couple of plus tools to be recruited at this point? And again, taking into account the transfer portal, junior college recruiting, you're probably not as recruiting as many high school players now as you were 5 or 10 years ago. But does a guy need to have a couple of plus tools coming out of high school for you to recruit him? Or do you still find yourself being intrigued by the guy who's just a good overall player, even though there's not one necessarily plus tool about him?
Yeah, I would say both. I think you can get away with both. I think if you're above average across the board, I think it's going to stand out. And then I think we kind of look at the other factors that go into it, like what type of teammate is he? What type of student is he? Does he look like he plays the game really hard? But then on the flip side of that, obviously, you want the high school kid that has the ability to kind of come in and make an impact right away, or else you're probably not going to recruit him because you don't want him wasting away on the bench. So I think if you look at our high school kids, they probably all have one tool that they do at a really high level. And then I think everything else kind of above average. And then you get the high school kids that have, like this year's pitchers that we brought in, like we have 3 freshman pitchers that can really pitch at a high level. And I mean, like, not just throw hard, but like throw the off speed in hitters counts, throw in and out both sides of the plate. Like, they do things at a really, really high level. We have a freshman catcher this year that, can really catch at a high level. The bat's fine. I would say that's probably his average tool, but the arm is like plus. I mean, it's a very, very plus arm behind the plate. So I think, like, maybe there's not every situation is different because every player is different, but I think if you can kind of get a kid, like, we'll never turn down a kid that's just a good baseball player. Maybe he's not an off-the-charts runner. He's an average runner, average thrower, but every time you go watch him play, he's getting results on the field. You're never going to turn that kid away, and I don't care if you're at LSU or if you're at, an NAIA. Like, you're going to take that player. You want winners on your team, and I think you hear that kind of sometimes with coaches where it's like, player X he's just a winner. He does everything right. He may not have an above average tool, but he just does everything right. Like, you want those kids on your team. I don't think it always comes down to tools, in my opinion.
How much have you changed? You're not that old. You're not a guy who's been coaching for 25 years or anything like that. But how have you changed in that regard as a recruiter, if at all, from when you first started until now, just based on results you've gotten from guys, based on maybe just what you felt like, what you feel is important has changed over the years? Like, how much has this part of recruiting changed for you since you first started until now, if at all?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I think I was guilty of this at St. Louis. I was chasing the radar gun a little bit when it came to pitchers. And I felt like it was our job as a staff to kind of develop the other stuff as long as they threw hard. And I don't always knew if that were, I mean, we got good players there, but I didn't know if that always translated. And now I'm looking for the kids, on the mound that are projectable, that show the ability to spin the breaking ball, that have multiple pitches, that have the ability to swing and miss, that throw strikes. I mentioned earlier that if you can't catch and throw in this program, you won't play. And if you're a pitcher and you can't throw strikes, you're not going to pitch. Just because, again, like, nobody's finished more in the top 10 in fielding percentage in the last 2 decades than this program. So like it's going to change and depend on what program you're in and what priority the head coach puts on. But at the same time, like my overall philosophy has changed from a pitching standpoint. Like find guys that have the ability to throw multiple pitches, that get swings and misses, and throw strikes. If you can do that, that's going to translate from junior college to Division I. It's going to translate from high school to Division I. Same thing, if you're going after a kid in the portal. From a positional player standpoint, I think having that kid that either A, plays multiple sports is really important. I think the kid that can repeat his swing consistently is important. Obviously he does need some tools, but I'm not chasing the kid that's just super raw, that's 5 tools, and it might not come for 3 years. I don't know. I mean, college baseball's changed so much since when I started. Like, you kind of have to win now because everybody's old all the time. But I think just, having the ability to find athletes and they have the ability to play multiple positions, whether they're infielders or outfielders, and at the plate they have the ability to show bat speed and hard hit contact rate and swing and miss. So the 2 things that I'm looking for positionally, from a hitting standpoint, lacking, they don't have any swing and miss, and then pitchers are throwing strikes. And then from a defensive standpoint, we're looking for guys that can catch and throw. So it's definitely changed. I think there was probably more of a priority on, at St. Louis, like finding dudes that can really hit, and we'll worry about the defense later. And here, we kind of do it the opposite.
You also mentioned to me before we started recording about how important you think it is to kind of look into the character, the background of this player before you recruit him, whether it's a high school player or a transfer, and whether it's a junior college transfer or transfer portal coming from another 4-year. When you are checking into a kid, doing some background on a kid, Connor, what types of questions are you asking, and who are you calling? Assuming you're calling coaches that the kid has played for, but tell me if you call somebody else. But I'm just curious as to what sort of questions you're asking and what sort of answers that you're hoping to hear. And I want to ask this in particular again for the high school player who's listening to this, the high school coach who's listening to this, who's trying to build young men who are going to have success when they leave his program, and even parents that just want confirmation that they've been doing the right thing with their own kids, whatever it may be. I just want to know, and I want you to be as honest as you can here. Who are you calling? What kind of questions are you asking? And, what are you hoping to hear in response?
Yeah, great question. We'll start with high school. So with the high school kids, we're going to call the summer coaches, the travel ball coaches, and then we'll call the high school coaches as well. Sometimes the high school coach is seeing him outside of the field. Well, both coaches will see him outside of the field. The high school coach might see him in the classroom because many high school coaches are teachers. So you get to kind of understand what they are in the classroom and what type of person they are away from the field. The summer ball coach is seeing him in a hotel. You might be seeing him at restaurants. How does this kid interact with just the general public? Because if you're, I'm not going to say the word, but if you're that type of kid that's rude to, a waitress in a restaurant or the janitor in the high school, I mean, we don't want you in our program. We want you to be respectful. And then we're also going to talk to some of his teammates as well. And the question I always ask kids, and I get a kick out of it, is if I had 3 of your teammates on the phone, like you asked me, what would the team say about me as a coach? I asked the kids the same question. If I had 3 of your teammates on the phone, how would they describe you? And I always love it. I always love to hear the kids' answers. Sometimes kids struggle because I put them on the spot, but that's all right. I want to see how they react. So, we'll also try to get in touch with some counselors and stuff inside of the high school. And then obviously if they're a local kid, we know a lot of people in the community inside the city of Omaha where we can kind of find out what type of kid it is. But, and then I'll also do a deep dive into their social media. I think if you're posting stuff on social media that's, questionable, I don't know, man. I don't want to put my head down at night, on my pillow, and I'm worried about what you're posting or what you're saying out there. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but I think at the same time, like, you need to be careful what you're saying. Because once it's out there, it's out there. And usually every NFL draft, some person gets screwed over for some stupid tweet that they put out 10 years ago. So, we're kind of doing a deep dive on their social media. And then we're doing a deep dive inside of the community to the best of our ability. And with the transfer portal stuff, we're calling their college coach. And we'll call scouts in the area and stuff like that. So, we just try to find out as much as possible. And the biggest thing is it really has less to do with their skill set, and it has more to do with who they are as a person. If we're calling people about who you are as a person, it probably means you're already qualified as the player. Now we need to make sure that you're a well-rounded person. And, again, I've crossed off way too many kids that have a ridiculous amount of talent because I'm just not going to mess up our clubhouse because you're a selfish individual. It's not fair to the other 39 guys that are on this team.
So you are legitimately crossing guys off your list or ending communication with them or never even calling them in the first place despite having taken your time to go watch them play multiple times. You're legitimately crossing guys off of a list if you make calls about them and you hear that the kid is, rude to a waitress, rude to his teachers in school, kind of I'll just use the term a jerk to his other teammates, or is just not the character that you want. Not like anybody that has a criminal background, but just someone who's just not like a really good kid, like a stand up kid, a mature kid. You are actually crossing guys off when you hear these answers that make you really feel uncomfortable about the character of a player, despite the fact that he's a good baseball player.
Yeah, and again, like maybe I could be in the minority. I think good coaches are going to do that across the board. Maybe some people, I guess the counter argument would be, isn't it your job to kind of mold the kid? Yeah, that's a fair comeback. My comeback would be, if he's that bad in high school, then what is he going to be when mom and dad aren't there? Is it going to be that much worse? Is it worth the risk? I just like, and again, I'm going to sound old school here, but like we see way too many athletes in the media for like the negative stuff. And it's annoying as a college coach because there's so much good every single day that, ESPN and all these other, media outlets, like they hone in on the negative stuff because obviously it sells. And I think it stems back way before that. I just don't know if we're teaching the right lessons to kids at a young age. And if we're hearing about this stuff, I mean, if you can't be polite to somebody that's serving your food, I mean, why are you going to be any different with me as a coach? And so, yeah, I absolutely do cross people off. And again, if this blows up on Twitter and people are like, I'm full of it and this and that, I don't really care. I don't care. It's just not worth the risk, in my opinion, for college baseball. Maybe you can get away with it from football. Maybe you can get away with it in basketball, but college baseball cannot get away with having a negative image on it. We're just not popular enough. We're trending in the right direction, but we're nowhere near the same area code as basketball and football. You can't take that risk. It's just not worth it.
I think it's a great answer, man. And I was kind of asking that last question just because I want to drive the point home of how important it is to be more than an athlete and more. You have to be more than just a good athlete to have success at the next level, whatever the next level is for you. And I think there has to be certainly a commitment to being better at your trade, but also I really do believe that it's what kind of person you are will translate and will have eventually it's going to, what goes around comes around as far as what kind of person you are. And I know there's a lot of coaches who would answer that question the same way. In fact, I would argue that most college coaches would answer the same way you did. But I thought it was important to ask you because I think it's important to drive that point home for anybody who's followed us an hour and 5 minutes into this podcast. Connor, I certainly appreciate your time, man, and everything that you gave and shared in this podcast. I think we could probably have several more to talk about some of the things. So I hope that we can get you back in the future. I hope this is not the last time that you're on a Figured Out Baseball podcast or just a part of anything we're doing here on the platform. But I really, really appreciate your time, man. And it was great catching up with you personally. And I just want to wish you and the team all the success, both this season and beyond. And again, I certainly appreciate your time today.
I appreciate you having me on, Jeff. I would love to hop on again. I think we can touch on a bunch of more topics. So appreciate all that you do for the game, and definitely be tuning in on some future podcasts for sure.